Well, thank you, Sumi, and thank you to both of those inspiring women. I think we all in the room can agree, because we've just seen a taste of their leadership, that it makes a difference when women lead. So thank you to Mayor Giffey, thank you to Mayor Hidalgo for opening this conference. It's the Q conference, and I have a question for you. Can we have a second tier of power that is not nation states? You heard some of the reasons why just now, and I think it's already happening, and I think we can do more. Yes, the nation states have the HIMARS and the GIMLRs and the standing armies and the seats at the table of formal power, and we need them. We need them every day across the territory of Ukraine, where cities are being degraded, they're being denuded, they're being decivilized. But there is a powerful second tier that has emerged in cities and global networks of cities. We've just heard some of the examples, and I'm going to try to give you some more proof points. The networks of cities are capable of guiding, of leading this world through some of the most urgent transformations: climate adaptation, economic transformation, altering our dependency on critical resources, pandemic recovery toward a future that is closer to you, our urban citizens, grounded and possibly optimistic in its nature. Mayors can manage all of this, and they can take the trash out and keep the buses running on time. Our cities are the seismographs of global challenges, but they're also the laboratories of the change that we so desperately need. These changes demand sometimes radical departures, kinetic innovation, an attitude toward risk-taking and risk assumption, an appetite for experimentation and for learning. And all of you in this room, particularly young people, to me represent just that. But you are the engineers and the innovators and the media people and the creatives and the builders who contribute to doing just that work in the city. Where does urban power come from? It comes from proof, not armies, not reserve currencies, not fiscal independence, though Mayor Hidalgo would want that when she told us she needs more money. International law empowers multilateralism and its institutions: NATO, the UN, the WTO. Cities can't force their solutions through vetoes and votes. So their strongest power is their credibility. Their ultimate power is proof that they can get it done, that they can deliver better for the lives of their citizens. Although they're gigantic in size, 37 million is the population of Tokyo, 29 million of Delhi, and we're just 3 million here in Berlin, their power grows exponentially in two ways: if they're deeply connected to one another, and if they lead by example. They work with one another now across borders and across time zones. Coastal Miami and their views of how to make safe and sustainable cities when water rises and gets warmer will be much more vital to recovering cities and urban life in Pakistan, where hundreds of thousands of people are suffering now from floods, than of other cities in the United States in comparison, like landlocked Pocatello, Idaho. So I'm asking you, and I'm asking all of us, what will it take for nation states to recognize this power and to rethink their interactions with their own cities and with other cities across the globe? We need to reconsider whether our multilateral institutions and the way that they exist now still serve us, whether that's what we want to preserve for the next 70 years forward, or how they need to change and what kind of other people need to be at the table. Are nation states willing to engage in a conversation about the changing nature of power? I want you to consider with me 5 areas of emerging urban power: demography, dollars, well, I needed a D, so it's not really dollars. I mean euros, yen, whatever currency you'd like. Democracy, data, and diplomacy. None of us will forget those vans, those white vans, the cooling vans parked outside those hospitals in New York City, those makeshift morgues, or the convoys of trucks between northern Italian cities at the beginning of the pandemic. In the last 3 years, what we have seen as a complete asset, density suddenly became deadly. And while the shifts in populations in the world's megacities were noticeable, some contracted up to 1% in their population, urbanization continued apace. People moved, but they moved to other cities. They moved to second-tier cities. Cities incentivized them to go. Cities want cities. They want talent. They want people. 55%, as Mayor Giffey already said, of our global population lives in cities. And even though that contracted, 68% of us will be urban dwellers by 2050. China, India, Nigeria are forecast to drive at least 35% of that growth. And those people will come seeking economic opportunities, make no mistake. When density, like New York's with 29,000 people per square mile, pushes people to what is possible, they need to take action. Those are the front lines and of the highest impact risks that emanate from human closeness. And still, cities thrive on the sheer number and sheer capacity to attract talent, technology, and tolerance, as Richard Florida put it. We cluster in urban areas because this is the place and this is the way in which we thrive. In the post-pandemic times, even after nationalist policies and demagogic leadership threatened talent, US and European cities pushed back. They found new ways of negotiating with national law. They issued special visas for entrepreneurs, and I'm talking specifically of American cities when Donald Trump desperately wanted to take that away. They allocated local citizenship to protect their refugees and their migrants when a president of the United States wanted to squeeze them out. They fought hard to retain urban talent when a national government wanted to take that away. But the pandemic demonstrated that cities were often failing people because we weren't as technologically connected as we needed. 45% of people across the globe lacked access to broadband internet. And what did? They turned to their existing networks, including C40, an organization that the mayor of Paris is the vice chairwoman of, and their national experts to change the way that they do business, because cities can do it faster, they can do it better, and they can do it with more people involved. They right-sized their spaces to make them more livable. They created permitting policies to create 5G oases in places where people were locked out of technology. They created new funding mechanisms to support low-income migrants to the Mayor's Migration Council, because cities are even clever at finding new pockets of money and supporting those that need to stay, that need their protection, and that need their arms thrown around them. Did those solve problems everywhere? No, of course not. The World Economic Forum has a global risk indicator that looks at risks of social fracture. And if cities aren't integrated into national recovery strategies, into investments, as Mayor Hidalgo pointed out, civic leaders and businesses lose. But cities are much more capable than the national level of tracking what works, creating data and knowledge and information around the elements that it takes to make human thriving. And because that is the case, national leaders have begun to wake up. When President Biden took office between November and January of his taking office, he realized that if he really was going to achieve social transformation in the United States, build back better, and rescue America, the American Rescue Plan, he was going to need mayors to put pressure on Congress for that to be accepted, to change society. Dollars, yen, euro, whatever your currency. Cities drive 80% of global GDP. They comprise, even after the pandemic and all the economic contraction we saw, 42 of the world's largest 100 economic entities. Just let that sink in. Before the pandemic, Mexico City and Guangzhou had economies and economic outputs that were comparable to some of the world's 7 largest corporations, including Walmart and Volkswagen. These cities are connected to one another daily through the fiber optic cables and the data that flows through them, through ports and through airports. Paris, larger GDP than South Africa. New York City, larger GDP than all of Australia. They're still the anchoring nodes of the global economy, even if the structure is facing massive transformation. That gives them both economic clout and political stewardship to lead in this transformation toward a greener, more sustainable operation of our global economy. Cities have created 4,000 special economic zones to attract FDI, to bring in money, to reshape global supply chains, because that is what we need right now. Those are the questions we are asking ourselves. How, locally, can we be safer, more thriving, more sustainable, more functional? And even when our supply chains were rattled by transportation chaos, what did mayors do? They got on the phone with one another. No, actually, they got on WhatsApp with one another. The mayor of LA, Eric Garcetti, tracked PPE for his city when it was to be denied to him, together with the 4 mayors of the Visegrad 4, Warsaw, Bratislava, and Prague and others, when their cities needed that kind of infrastructure and illiberal governments around them squeezed them out, they made sure they got what they needed for their citizens. And when something doesn't work for cities, they push back. 40 mayors didn't like what they saw in a major trade deal in TTIP. TTIP failed because they can muster public momentum, businesses, people, ideas, that if something doesn't serve cities, because cities are the global economy, it sinks. Democracy. We've heard about that this morning already, how cities will save our democracies. Less than 45% of citizens in OECD countries trust their national governments. I bet there's some in this room who feel that way about the government here. Democracy has been sliding year on year, and the growth of digital tools of disinformation, as we heard, they measurably weaken the democratic resilience in the world. But cities buck that trend. We heard that vividly already. Mayors are popular. Look at the 2 women who just spoke to you. They're pragmatists, they're nonpartisan. Do you know which parties these mayors belong to? They have some of the highest approval ratings across the globe, 69%. Here in cities, democracy feels direct, pluralism feels direct. If you have a conflict with your neighbor, you have a conflict with your neighbor. You have it out. Pew Research reported that in Europe and America, people saw cities as laboratories of trust building to confront partisan tensions and overcome tribal divisions. Cities make democracy, direct participation, and citizenship work because they've looked at other ways of budgeting, how they spend their money. They ask you to be a part of it. They ask you to vote on their dollars, cents, euros, and yen. Where does it go? How do we change the ways in which we interact in this city? You should be in charge. And that's what they do. They put digital tools in your hands so that you can one call to City Hall and feedback what's wrong in your neighborhood and what's wrong and what should be right with your neighborhood. So policy feels personal. They want to show that open government sources and the kind of data allows them to know where the solutions are, make them measurable, make them visible, and feed them up to the higher entity. Even in non-democratic Singapore, that works. The semblance of influence over local decisions there is associated with much greater ethical leadership, even in an autocracy. Again, cities have networked themselves, have cooperated with one another to push back against national overreach. I talked about the Visegrad 4 and their sourcing of PPE and ventilators for themselves when a Viktor Orban and a peace government denied them. The same was true of the United States cities. They pushed back when the Trump administration pulled the plug on the Paris Climate Change Agreement. 297 entities, cities, governors, and businesses bounded together to keep America on track. And so that is the only reason why the United States can maybe partially claim to be able to fulfill the Paris climate change agenda on track. City legitimacy in the international arena comes from data. Cities track that data, and that's my 4th point. They track that data, and they use open data sources with their universities, collaborating with innovative centers to make that data accessible to you. We're wary of handing our data over to the central government. We're wary of handing it over to Apple. Turns out that when cities are in play, we're not quite as wary. They've figured out structures of interacting with one another through the big networks like C40 and U20, where they put repositories of knowledge in terms of what works for them, not just case studies, but actual data. How do you cool a city? How do you bring down temperatures by 1%? Is it white roofs or is it green roofs? Is it plants on balconies or is it parks in cities? They have figured out ways of measuring that data, working with research, and putting it back in the hands of an actual network node in C40. So technology helps. It allows cities to forecast and to plan and to take action for one another. Yes, smart technology is booming, a $135 billion market. But real cities have taken that back even for themselves. They've found ways to crowdsource and to change what data actually means in their planning and in their discharge of the way that they work with data. They're wary of surveillance and control. Of course we are, of course you are, and the cost of big systems. So they've piloted Open RAN and crowdsourcing, and that makes things like the voluntary local review possible. Cities said, no, we're not interested in being a subject of the Sustainable Development Goals, goal number 11. We are the Sustainable Development Goals. You're gonna get none of this done if not for us. So they instituted voluntary local review, and a city right here in Germany, Mannheim, is at the vanguard of measuring how this city can put its example to work for everybody else trying to create that sustainable future. So data is supercharging the way in which cities can assume power because they are proving that what they're putting in place actually works. Which gets me to everything that you've heard this morning, diplomacy. Cities don't care about borders. They've become self-interested actors. They need to get things done, and they need to get things done quickly. So when LA needs green hydrogen, it goes directly to the government of Japan. It does not pass by Washington. When Colombia needs different irrigation infrastructures, Colombian cities, Bogota goes directly to the government of the Netherlands. They sign MOUs, they create special investment zones, and they exchange diplomats. The chief diplomat of Los Angeles used to be the US ambassador to ASEAN. Like nation states, cities are doing this out of enlightened self-interest. They build institutions, they convene summits, much like this one. And through Eurocities and the Parliament of Mayors, they seek solidarity in lobbying supranational institutions to make space for cities. When you think about Ukraine right now, it's not an image of power that you see. Those cities are bombed out, they're smoking, all urban life has been decimated, mayors have been kidnapped. It looks powerless. But you know why the Russian dictator had to go after cities. Because that's where power lives. That's where history lives. That's where the repository of civilization and engagement and collaboration lives. That's why the Russian dictator is going after Ukrainian cities. And what are they doing? We heard it today. They're reaching out to their sister cities because rebuilding will be a financial effort of nation states, but getting it right-sizing it, making it ecological, letting Ukrainian cities jump, fast forward into the future, that will happen through partnerships with cities. So I ask you, how can nation states fully accept the power of cities at their tables? How do they make room? When do they make room? And can it be now? Thanks very much.
Thank you, Cathryn.